Hello aliens and worms, I'm Cosmicat. Welcome to today's broadcast. Since I tipped my hand a bit last time and showcased some of the more personal work I've been focusing on, I thought I should follow that up by actually giving a bit of context to the story. If you haven't watched the Operation Blackout story preview, I'd very much appreciate it if you would take a look since it's a video I'm particularly proud of. But you don't need to have seen it to understand what I'll be talking about today. Today's speed art is of one of the characters featured in Operation Blackout, Iyakuum. This piece in particular is one I'm especially proud of, and it helped me to quell some inner turmoil I'd had at the time of drawing it. Honestly, I've been dying to showcase it because I do believe it's the single greatest drawing I've done in my life so far, and I see it as a hallmark of my recent growth as an artist. Now then, allow me to introduce you to the rudest, crudest character I've ever created, Iyakuum Vuxiap. Bounty hunter extraordinaire and captain of the SC Starsick, Iyakuum is a connoisseur of chaos. Everything he does is in the name of his own freedom and individuality. He is a member of a species called the Sandvex, is male and uses he/his pronouns, and, in the main canon of the story, is in his early adulthood. It's difficult to give an exact number to that age because Sandvex age differently than humans do, and on top of that, age is calculated by appearances of Sandvex's moon, and is a different length of time than a year is on Earth. Iyakuum himself is exactly 7 feet tall, which is somewhat short for Sandvex males. In fact, his sister Nasuya is slightly taller than him. However, he typically towers over other species in general, so it doesn't really bother him. He's lanky, with proportions that might seem awkward to other species. Sandvex typically have lightweight to athletic builds, and Iyakuum is no different. His size gives him the speed advantage in combat situations against heavier species, and allows him to slip into tight spaces, both of which are good for the jobs he typically takes in his line of work. As showcased in the drawing here, he's pretty flexible, and should do stretches to maintain this. His body is littered with scars, most of which he'll boast loudly about. He refuses to cut his long black hair, but will sometimes tie it back if necessary for a task. It annoys him how long it takes to dry, but it's worth it to look that flawless. Sandvexu, his home planet, is almost entirely covered by dense jungle. Rivers wind in and out of the trees, all leading to one large ocean. On the edge of the ocean are the planet's most developed cities. Within the jungles, many Sandvex still live the old way in tribes and secluded villages, but the city dwellers are the sole reason Sandvexu is considered a spacefaring planet. The cities are safe and prosperous, having the wide ocean to feed them and allow for massive ports to be built for both boats and spacecrafts. However, the jungles are the exact opposite. Hostile creatures lurk in the darkness of the trees, and the Sandvex barely cling to the top of the food chain due only to their intellect and communication. Most Sandvex would not win in a fair one-on-one fight against some of the larger beasts of their planet, but coordinated hunts, tools, and the sheer ferocity of their will to live have kept them populous throughout most of the planet. Iyakuum, along with his sister Nasuya, were both born in a litter of 4 in one of the many small tribes in the jungles. He was always close with his sister, and often they would protect each other from their more aggressive brothers. They never quite knew their father, who disappeared on a hunt. For some reason, while his mother and siblings mourned, Iyakuum never quite believed his father was dead. He doesn't have an explanation for what he thinks actually happened, but he tends to grow bitter when asked about it. Later, when one of his brothers was killed during a practice hunt, he and his remaining siblings were guarded much more carefully. Their mother grew overbearing and even cruel, forcing her will upon her children, especially Nasuya and Iyakuum. Eventually, Nasuya stole Iyakuum away while everyone slept, and the 2 siblings escaped to the coast. For a long while, they survived by stealing or doing odd jobs here and there for unsavory folk. They traveled by stowing away on cargo ships and visited many planets this way. Their skills as thieves and spies grew with each job they took on, but soon it was evident their paths were going separate ways. Both of them were offered to work for the galactic government as, essentially, police officers. Nasuya agreed, having grown tired of the chaotic nature of their lives, but Iyakuum couldn't bear the thought of giving up his freedom. He chose to continue his life as a vagabond, which eventually led him to meet a man named Moiku. Iyakuum and Moiku became partners as a mercenary duo. At first, they took on jobs on whatever planet they had the money to travel to, but they eventually saved up enough to buy their very own star cruiser. While they were shopping around, they took one Iyakuum had his eyes on for a test drive. Moiku was the only one between them with any real experience piloting a cruiser, so it left Iyakuum free to wander around the craft to inspect everything. That's when he realized they had their own little stowaway. Brennig, a human-like man, had been squatting in that ship for a little while since it was one of the more expensive ones to keep fueled and functioning, meaning most customers would move on to something more streamlined and easy to manage. Iyakuum was instantly enamored with him and motioned for Brennig to stay low and keep quiet. Iyakuum had already made up his mind to buy the ship, but he probably would have been forced to anyway because Moiku ended up becoming nauseous and vomited in the cockpit after letting Iyakuum take a whirl at the controls. To commemorate that horribly embarrassing moment, Iyakuum elected to call the cruiser the SC Starsick. Once the thing was theirs, he finally told Moiku about the young man stowed away on the ship. Moiku was incredibly displeased, but he ended up agreeing to let him stay, if only to make Iyakuum shut up about it for even a single moment. It was the start of a beautiful friendship, and Iyakuum found himself completely engrossed in this newfound plaything. He had Brennig do some of the more boring tasks on the ship in exchange for a room, food, and his protection, which often ended up being protection from Moiku's bad moods. Eventually, Iyakuum started spending much more time with Brennig than Moiku, whose company he found more pleasant and enriching. Eventually, Moiku met with an untimely death, and Iyakuum only had Brennig left as the one person he could put his full trust into. Their bond grew strong, and the duo would likely die for each other if it ever came to that. Iyakuum became the captain of the ship and the sole leader of their bounty hunting operation, and appointed Brennig to be his first mate. As they traveled, they picked up other crew members. The cast of Iyakuum's crew changes somewhat constantly, as many people are very turned off by his methods and mannerisms, but Brennig is always by his side. To the current canon of the story, Iyakuum is considered one of the more highly skilled mercenaries and is almost exclusively contracted by high-paying clients who have either lost faith in cheaper bounty hunters or who have absolutely no room for screw-ups. This right here is just a cursory overview of Iyakuum's history. A lot of the more gritty details were left out because they're important story elements that I'd rather present in a more dedicated fashion to give each subject its respect. To make things clear, during the Operation Blackout story, Brennig is the only member of Iyakuum's crew, meaning it's only the two of them working on that particular job. This also takes place before the main part of the overall story. I truly love all my characters, but Iyakuum holds a really special place in my heart. He's exceptionally fun to plan for because he's unpredictable. He does things in his own way, on his own time, and will change plans at the drop of a hat. This can be especially jarring to poor Brennig, who meticulously plans out every detail of a job. He could be described as narcissistic and proud to a fault. Iyakuum engages with his surroundings however he pleases, finding things like rules and social standards to be restricting. He is a chaotic force in the lives of those who can stand to be around him, and often gets his cohorts into bad situations ranging from simple awkward social encounters to full-on battles to the death. He lives his life in worship to his own freedom. Despite this, however, he appears to have a few weaknesses if one is willing to look close enough. Sandvex in general are typically treated by other species as nothing more than savages and thieves. Stereotypes and cliches can be suffocating, and this causes Iyakuum to sometimes go out of his way to act high class, making a lot of his social interactions performative. It gives him an edge in business discussions, since his charisma and keen insight forces clients to treat him more like an equal than some hired thug. However, it gets exhausting for him. While taking on jobs for others might seem like a violation of his independence, it is expensive to maintain his ship. And to be able to go where he pleases, he does in fact need a ship. Not to mention all of his favorite things are on that ship, as well as his favorite people. Or person. Another product of his pride, Iyakuum is especially hard on himself when things go wrong. He treats the failures of his crew as his own failures to not prepare them enough. Despite his crude personality, he does make a fine leader, if only to spare himself the embarrassment and heartache of screwing up something important. He treats his crew and everything else on his ship as his own possessions. This can mean good things and bad depending on the circumstance. He never forces anyone to do anything they don't want to or can't accomplish, because that would just be breaking his toys. Conversely, he often makes decisions that are better for himself than they are for the rest of the crew, which has led plenty of people to leave his employ. Of course, his favorite among his horde is Brennig. Iyakuum doesn't hide the way he dotes on him, sometimes even flaunting it in the faces of his other crew members. He teases him a lot, making flirty passes at him for a reaction, calling him irritating nicknames, and laughing at his expense. However, he becomes prickly and even hostile towards others who might try to do the same. This gives Brennig something of an immunity among the crew. Luckily, he's just shy and quiet enough that most people leave it alone. Brennig is the only person besides Nasuya who Iyakuum feels comfortable being physically close with, and it's not rare to see him do things like link arms with him, climb up onto his back or shoulders, or bump foreheads with him, which is a show of affection for the Sandbecks. Iyakuum knows Brennig's limits and makes accommodations to ensure his safety, but he finds joy in pushing him to be better. It puts Brennig in some tough situations at times, but he always keeps a close eye on him just in case things go wrong. On the opposite side of that coin, Brennig is a positive influence in Iyakuum's life. He gives Iyakuum a reason to act with more caution and can sometimes convince him to act to the benefit of his crew as a whole rather than only for himself. Brennig brings logic and reason to Iyakuum's life and keeps him grounded during his manic highs and devastating lows. Brennig is one of the few things that remains constant in his life, and Iyakuum has absolutely killed people to protect him. In the story as a whole, Iyakuum represents the gray areas of life. He always dances on the line of morality, never leaning too far one way or the other. Every job he takes for some evil person, there was an equally good task performed for someone else. Every cruel thing he says to one person is a kind word towards the ones he cares about. Every death he causes is another life potentially saved. And this is why I love this character so much. He's the most interesting to write about in the sense that he's probably the only character without a moral compass. Even Brennig, for all the bad things he's done in Iyakuum's name, does feel the weight of those sins. Iyakuum can be a force for good as easily as he can be for evil, but his only true alignment is to himself. It'll be interesting to see as the main story goes along how or if this will ever change. If you're still tuned in, thanks for making it through my ramblings. I can get pretty long-winded when talking about my story and characters because I'm just really passionate about them. These are actually all things people supporting my Patreon already know or have access to. Patreon has essentially become the main place where I talk about my plans for my characters and stories, as well as showing all the artwork and writing first. Every person who helps, even with just $1, gets access to all this stuff before anyone else. For example, this drawing has been completed for over 3 weeks, and all of this backstory on Iyakuum has been posted on Patreon for more than a month. If you can't support financially but still want to help out, you can always follow my various social media links, all of which are in the description below. Knowing people care about what I'm doing is a huge help, and honestly, it lifts my spirits and inspires me to keep going. Speaking of which, I probably should have started this by asking you to like the video and subscribe to this channel if you like what you're seeing here. This has been Cosmocat. Don't forget to refuel your ships, everybody.